And our final guest is Craig Whitney, president of the Fargo, Moorhead, West Fargo Chamber of Commerce. Craig, thanks for joining us.
Scott, thanks. Great to be here with you.
This is an unusual event for the Chamber. I mean, chambers very often have forums and discussions of what they're in favor of and put it out, but don't necessarily say, hey, you agree, you disagree, let's get in the same room together and debate this. So we're plowing new ground here, right?
Absolutely. And, you know, one of the things that I have done in the 2 years that I've been here at the Chamber is we have, and our board is committed to being more involved in public policy issues, things that make a difference to our members, either positively or negatively impact them. And we feel very strongly, after a lot of deliberation, that Measure 2 is bad public policy. It's dangerous, it's reckless, it's a ballot initiative that is out there without providing any solutions. And at the same time that we debated this, we said what you just said in your introductory comments. Property taxes are too high. We need to completely look and restructuring our entire tax system. But doing something this drastic and overnight doing away with $800 million to $1 billion in property tax revenue is reckless.
Yet you're arguing for you're in a sense it's counter to myself as a conservative to sit here and say, oh, wait a minute, forcing a system to reform is a bad idea, because essentially that's what Measure 2 would do, wouldn't it? It would force these folks to reform it. Why? Something I assume from your statements you agree is necessary. Talk about how you've come to that decision, and your board's come to the decision that, despite the fact that we'd all like lower taxes, this is a bad idea.
Well, I think there's so many unanswered questions, and we talked a lot about those today. What is fairly funded, and the words that are thrown around here? What does it really mean? And so this is a very serious issue. It's going to take time. I wish, as you and I were talking about earlier, I wish we had the answer to this question, but it's going to take years. It's going to take years to talk about it. What was interesting today is we heard from business people, we heard from a former legislator, we heard from our former governor, and they all know from serving in the legislature in Bismarck that taking away, and by the way, I think the component of this that is most troubling is taking away the local control. And having the legislature, that I remind people, meets every other year for 80 days, having to deal with over 3,000 political subdivisions and budgetary issues is just not, it doesn't make any sense.
Now, I think what Ed Schaefer was doing, both on the air with us and also on the panel, was in a sense scolding elected leaders now by saying, you guys have kicked the can down the road too long. And that's why we're here. We're here because, we've not faced this problem soon enough. And as you say, that discussion out of this needs to start, doesn't it?
That's right. And I think what Governor Schaefer pointed out is probably how a lot of people feel, that, we can cut spending, we can cut things, but again, this kind of just radical, overnight, retroactive, by the way, and a June ballot initiative would go back to January 1st of this year, is scary.
Wait a minute, no, I hadn't heard that. So you're saying in June, this passes, and then ultimately we restart the clock?
It's retroactive to January 1st of 2012.
Well, so that would be chaotic, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
You don't have no time to plan for it. You go back and...
No, and that's, again, Scott, that's just one of many things that, as I said, this is not well thought out. And the group that is promoting this doesn't provide solutions. We need solutions. If you think we have a problem, we need to fix something, then provide the solutions that can do it. And what we're scared about is you can't just, as I said, the $850 million to $1 billion in property tax revenue. If people think that's just going to go away and we're not going to have other ways of making that income, they're crazy. So some people say, well, we'd have to raise sales tax. Well, do you know that we'd have to double the sales tax rate to make up for that loss in the revenue, taking us to the highest sales tax rate in the country, making us completely uncompetitive in the world. Or people say, well, let's raise income tax. We'd have to raise income tax rate by 3 times to do this. And this money is going to have to be replaced.
What do you think about this?
Well, I think some of the comments today, look at the state of Minnesota as an example of what you don't want to get yourself into. And so I think there's a lot of concerns, and I've heard people on both sides of the river weigh in on this.
Very interesting. I think that the overriding theme we heard today is the uncertainty. The actual measure itself does not address enough of the key components that there would be a whole lot of uncertainty, and that's not good for a business climate.
It's not.
We've had enough of that out of the federal government for far too long.
Absolutely, and one of the things that I hear most from our members is their fear as they're ramping things back up. They're starting to hire people. They're seeing the economy. Of course, we've been very lucky here, but they're very concerned about the uncertainty. And particularly at that level, what they're talking about is, what is the federal government, what's the Congress going to do to me? So they're pulling the reins back. They're not making capital expenditures. They're not necessarily hiring people back because of that very thing, the uncertainty.
And the other thing I thought was interesting is Ed Schaefer, who obviously made some very poignant comments on both sides, saying, look, if this thing passes, it'll force reform. And so that would be a good thing. If it fails, it's still time to address the issue and still have to do it. But he went on to say that he is voting no on this, opposes Measure 2 for two very important words, local control. So, I mean, even if ultimately the question I think everybody needs to ask themselves is, if you agree that property taxes are too high and you agree there needs to be reform, who ought to decide? And that's where I think Ed came down to say, look, this is really, that ought to come from the bottom up.
That's right. And, people need to understand that if they don't like what their legislators, their city council, their commission are doing, don't vote for them. And but taking the control away from these political subdivisions is not a good way to go. Fascinating debate. We'll have it all up at ScottHannon.com, beginning to end, including all of our conversations with the folks after. So hope folks get informed. The June ballot is when this question will be put to North Dakota voters in the primary. Thanks, Craig. Appreciate it. Thank you, Scott. Craig Whitney, president of the Fargo-Moorhead Chamber of Commerce, Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber of Commerce, the host for this Measure 2 debate, special edition of the Common Sense Club and the Scott Hannon Show. Thanks for listening, folks. Have a great day. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Healthy soils